density dependent relationships that are part of environmental resistance. One is predation. When one organism kills another in order to eat it, you eat and kill something. You can't eat it before you kill it. Or you can, like oysters, but anyway, you kill it and then you eat it, generally. In the relationship, you've got the eater, the predator, and they eat the prey, the food. Eater, food. These two organisms rely heavily on each other's population success. So here, what we have is we have a lynx, which is like a medium-sized cat, and you have a hare, which is bunny rabbits. Let's take a look at the hares are the blue, they're the food. The lynx are the predators, the eater. So let's start at the beginning. We're going to first trace the hares or the rabbits. You've got this one on the next page as well, the graph. So the rabbits, when the rabbit population starts to increase, they become more dense, and shortly thereafter then, so if they're the food starts to increase, the predators, a little lag time, a few years later, predator population starts to increase because they're like, woo, there's a lot of food around. We can grow. Things are good. Okay, now you get a lot of predators. And when you have a lot of predators, there's a lot more competition for food. And so they start eating off the bunny rabbits. And so then the bunny rabbit population, when the predator population gets high, the rabbit population shortly thereafter starts to decrease because there's less and less food, a lot more competition for food. Shortly thereafter, then the predator population starts to go down because they've eaten all the bunny rabbits. Now both populations are low. When the predator population is low, the prey population, the food population starts to increase. But then the food starts to increase, so the predators start to increase. And so you can see there's a little lag time that when food starts to increase, shortly thereafter, the predators increase. A lot of competition now, a lot of predators being supported, so the food population goes down, and then they start to die off because there's not enough food. When there's low predators, the prey goes up, predators shortly thereafter go up. So you can see they have a direct effect on each other's population density and size. That's why this is a density-dependent relationship. Make sure you understand this, because you may see something like this somewhere very important, like an exam. All right, so here's another situation that we have another two populations that rely on each other in this way and affect each other. We have the weevils, which are little like bugs, and then you have wasps, which are flying predators. And so when we see that we've got a high amount of predators, prey goes down. Predators then have a lot of competition, they go down. When you have low predators, prey population can rebound and come back up. Shortly thereafter, when you have a lot of food, the predators start to go up. A lot of predators make the prey population go down. Predator population goes down, prey population can increase. So again, they're having that direct effect on one another. Parasites. Parasites are a relationship where one organism lives in or on the other, tries to keep it alive as long as possible. So as kind of a little bit different than the predator-prey relationship, the predator is going to kill the prey and eat it. The parasite wants to eat off of and benefit from its host as long as it can. Many of you are parasites to your families. You cost a lot of money. You give a lot of resources, or you get a lot of resources. You cause a lot of stress for your family. is it smart that you go home and kill them? No, right? You're going to live off of them as long as you can. So that's the the parasite relationship, is that you're getting all of these benefits and you're trying to just kind of like be there, get the benefits without killing the thing that's giving you all the benefits. Sometimes you might reproduce and then eventually down the line the parasite might kill the host, but in general the idea is to kind of just like be there and get the benefits, live off of the host, and try not to kill the host. One of the most common parasites is the tapeworm. Some tapeworms can be very apparent quickly in the host, and sometimes there's people who have tapeworms and they live with them for 20, 30 years. Sometimes they die and they don't even realize that this thing was in them, that they can be there for a long time. Different species can exist for a long time without the host even knowing. And then there's competition. We looked a little bit about competition when we saw the predator-prey relationship. That when predators got very dense in number, they started to compete for the food. And what we know about competition is that competition generally hurts both or all participants. Even though when we say, like in humans, we say the winner. But don't you have to work hard to be a winner of a competition? You do. Most of us don't just walk into some kind of competition and we're like, I haven't done anything to prepare. This is easy. Usually there's a huge preparation, and then it's hard to win whatever competition you're in. And so it's the same thing in nature, is that when competition gets higher, it affects individuals in the population, and it has an effect on the density of the population. Generally, what organisms in nature are competing for is they're competing for some kind of limited resource, meaning that there's only so many. So in order to survive, you've got to get that little bit. So let's bring this to talking about survivorship and what you looked at in lab. And remember that when we're talking about the term survivorship, it's the percent that survive a specific interval of time. Survivorship, generally, what we're looking at is we're looking at like everybody at a certain age versus that age group. So we're looking at like a cohort. Kind of like you can look at it as glass half full, the percent that survive, or the percent that die. Survivorship, right? You've got, if 80% are surviving, you got 20% who die. Some people look at it one way, some look at the other way. There's 3 different types of survivorship. You're going to take a look at the data that you collected the other day, and you're going to identify, does it look more like this, or more like this? The 3 different kinds. Generally, what we do find is that when we're looking at survivorship curves, because life isn't just the same all the time, right? So like these 2 days, it's really, really hot. We have these heat advisories. So what can happen is that if you have a survivorship curve, and that survivorship curve, it generally will look like that, you might have that if here we have these really hot days, you might see it go, or we'll never go up again. You might see it go like that. That you might have a big dip in the amount of deaths during a period of time. And so while normally this population will display this type of survivorship curve, the reality of what's happening in the world and the changes to events like weather, competition, predators, prey, climate change, that we can have momentary things that affect the perfect shape of that survivorship curve. So that's one of the things that I want you to think about, is that when you take a look, and we're going to see that our survivorship curves are one of these 3 shapes, that you're not going to get a perfect shape, that if you have like some weird thing, I want you as a group to discuss why this particular time would have an effect that alters the shape of the survivorship curve and explain that. So this is more reality and this is perfection. And biology generally doesn't exist in perfection. All right, so we're going to talk about the characteristics of all three types of survivorship curve. The first kind is late loss. So type 1, late loss. Late meaning that most organisms live too late in life. They survive for a really long time. You don't have many deaths as youth. So a lot of them will show, when we're talking about type 1 survivorship, there's a very low juvenile death rate. The babies survive. Most individuals in this population survive to really old age. So there are characteristics of this population that allow this to be true. So the thing is that it is a convex survivorship curve. We're talking about this one right here. If remember, survivorship is L of X, the percent that survive for the different intervals, and this is age. And we're going from age 0 to, let's say, we'll just look at to 100, that what happens is that your juveniles are good. They're surviving. So you have a high amount of survival early on. When you're young, high amount of survival. And then most organisms are going, and dying later in life. So that when we're looking at type 1 survivorship, our deaths are occurring more so over here. Again, you've got high survivorship. Numbers are high. They stay high for a while. Survivorship high is juveniles, and then everybody starts, at one point, you're getting older and you have a lot more deaths. So when it's high up, it means the individuals are still alive. When it gets lower, it means they're dying. All right, let's talk about why. Let's think about why. So which organism would this be characteristic of? Bacteria, flies, sea turtles, birds, or humans? Yeah, humans, right? So we generally have a pretty good survivorship early on and more deaths later. Other large organisms who live very long lives. Now, it's a large organism, it lives a pretty long life. But the way that they reproduce has a huge impact on the shape of their survivorship. Sea turtles will have clutches of eggs between 1 and 200 at a time. They put them in the sand, and then they're like, good luck, babies. And so they've got a lot of babies that they've left behind, and it's up to the babies for them to survive on their own basic instincts that are incorporated into their genetics. And so if you're a baby sea turtle and you're in a group of 100 individuals and you're all hatching out, the likelihood of 1 or 2 of you surviving is the reality. The majority of them die off because they've got nobody to protect them and nobody to teach them, here's what you need to do to avoid predators, and here's what you need to do to get your nutrition, and here's what you need to do to find food, or to get your nutrients, your other nutrients. So sea turtles are different because the way they have their juveniles. Humans, elephants, giraffes, deer, not deer, sorry, deer are another thing for another reason, because of hunting. Other big species, bears, have 1 or 2 offspring, and they protect them, and they help them, and they live together through their lives. And so you have these like more community families, as opposed to sea turtles who are like plop, 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 and I'm on my way to swim back to the ocean. So humans are an example. We can even extend our survivorship, right? We can make this longer than we need to because of technologies that we have, which we'll get to. But other long-lived large animals, this is true of as well. Okay, and I have a question that hopefully y'all get because it just went over it. I always hate when I do this to myself. Okay, why would most of these organisms survive to old age? Each individual has many offspring which are not protected by their parents during early life. That doesn't sound good. Each individual has a few offspring which are protected by their parents during their early life. A or B? B, right? B is a good example of type 1 survivorship. We have that protection. So few offspring, help them, raise them, teach them. That's why type 1 survivorship has a very low juvenile death rate and why most of the organisms survive to later in life. So that's type 1. Type 2 is called constant loss. Constant loss is very stressful. If you're this kind of organism, it's very hard. There's a constant death rate within the population. So imagine, come to class and you're like, where'd Mohammed go? And someone's like, he died. And then you come to the next class and you're like, where'd Miriam go? She died. And every class you come in and somebody died. That's like type 2 survivorship curve. Is in the population, you have a good chance of waking up and being like, well, this could be the day that I die. Every single day. That sounds awful, right? But some organisms, that's the way it goes. So this type of survivorship is like this. Wake up, so you've got the population, you've got a whole population, and every day, death, 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 death. Who wants to live like that? Well, some organisms, that's just the way they have evolved, is to live like this. Birds are a big one. Birds migrate. They're infamous. Many bird populations are infamous for migrating, going from, in our area of the world, up from Canada, through the United States, down to South America, and then turning around and coming back, and doing that, and taking a whole year to go back and forth, chasing good weather. If you are a migrator, and even though maybe like you've done the migration route once, the next year, could things have changed on your path? Yeah, and especially with climate change. So every day you're flying into a new area that you don't know exactly what to expect. You don't know what predators live there. You don't know what changes in the environment have happened. Thus, you don't know what food will be available, what habitat will be available, who you're going to have to compete with for what. Stress, stress, stress. So these type of organisms, or like bacteria, I could cough and you could breathe in a streptococcus bacteria that causes you to get strep throat. That bacteria is just like, I don't know if that person is somebody who's resistant to their specific species, and if they are resistant, your immune system just like gets rid of them, or might find one of you who's susceptible to them growing very quickly. And then they have to deal with, okay, so now I gotta battle their immune system. But then if you start feeling sick, we often will go see a PA or a doctor, go to urgent care, and they may prescribe you an antibiotic, and then they gotta fight the antibiotic and the immune system, right? So bacteria are another good example. Other small organisms, like a lot of the protists as well. Their environments change quickly. Note that with survivorship for these two, population numbers start really high, and then they go down, 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 and they go across and down. So type 2, make sure you remember, type 2 starts high and goes low, and doesn't go that way. Now, if you just think for a second, they're not going to necessarily start with very few individuals and then have this population boom given the environments that they go live in, right? They're not going to great environments. If they were like the kind of population that could start low and show a really nice biotic potential or exponential growth, this could be true, but that's not characteristic of this type of population. So this is not true. Make sure you know type 2 goes high to low. Make sure you recognize that. And then early loss means that there's a lot of babies, but they die quickly. And the few that survive make it to old age. So death rate, very high. You end up losing a lot early in life, and then the ones that actually survive will make it to old age. But high death rate, high. So high death rate means a low number of juveniles right away. They die. The numbers of the individuals, the juveniles go down quickly. And then you get some that survive to old age. This is concave. No, I did that. I totally, oh my gosh. I'm like losing my mind. Sorry. Did it backwards. Juvenile death rate high. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Juvenile death rate high. High among deaths. Population goes down. Few survive to old age. I did a backward concave. Okay, so high death rate. You have a lot of individuals, they die quickly. So numbers go down. So in this area, you're seeing a lot of deaths. A lot of deaths right away, and you get a few of them that survive to old age. So your old age numbers are low. High deaths, few surviving later in life. Sorry about that. My brain went backward. So this is like the sea turtle. Produce a lot of offspring really quickly. Sea turtles, not only can they make what we call one clutch of offspring, they might lay 6. So they might have 6 nests where they lay between 100 and 200 individuals. So if we're talking about, a whole summer of mating and laying eggs, they might have somewhere between 600 and 1,200 babies. That of those babies that are born, only a few are going to survive because they're on their own. There is very little parental care. They're not getting taken care of. The other thing is deer, and deer, because of hunting season, they fit into this even though they're big and they live a long life. Because of hunting, because of cars hitting the does, the the babies, they can have a really quick juvenile death rate. So we've interfered with some other mammalian populations. Most invertebrates, bugs, sea urchins, corals, most plants, right? The pollen just flies in the air. It's got to land on the right species. And many ocean or water animals like fish. They're just pumping out sperm and egg and hoping they come together, or they're pumping out babies and saying like, bye, good luck everybody, hope you make it. So here, you've got, again, type 1, you have good parental care. Most individuals are gonna make it to a relatively older age. Type 2, migratory birds, bacteria, protists. Every day it's like, we might die, we might die, we might die. So you do have some that live to old age, but you don't have a lot. And then type 3, a lot of ducks. So like acorns, for example, plants are a good example, sea turtles, anything that lives in water, is that all these acorns, there's tons and tons of acorns, but how many of them become a mature tree? They have to have the right condition where they plop into the earth and then they can grow. And even, with climate change, there might be a drought and they die off early in life. So you have a high juvenile death rate. Few survive to old age. Okay, humans. Now we're going to get to, kind of mention them here and there, but what we talked about up to this point are basic principles of natural populations. But humans, we can defy all of this natural circumstance because we have technology. We are seeing an exponential growth rate continuing. A lot of people ask, what's the carrying capacity of humans? Oh, we don't know, because we've never started to level off. We have no idea. We still keep going, right? Even with COVID, we still have a very dangerous virus circulating around the globe, and it didn't really cause a blip in our population growth as humans globally. We have technology. We can use technology in a great variety of different ways, and not just talking about like your phone or your computer, but we can apply technology to the way we eat, the way we house ourselves, the way we protect ourselves. We have so many different ways and ways we care for ourselves when we get sick. So our technological advances in agriculture, industry, and medicine, when we talk about industry, we're talking about like housing and protection, cooling, heating. Right? These next 2 days, we're being told over and over and over again, don't spend a lot of time outside. So you get to come in here and it's cool. And we know a lot of people in the world who don't have air conditioning when they're having these extreme heat incidences. A lot of people are dying because your body can't survive past about 120 to 30 degrees, somewhere in there. Your body starts to shut down. And we're seeing a lot more of these heat incidences, right? But here in our area of the world, we get to go inside and it's cool. We're about at 8 billion people. We grow at about 0.84%, not even a 1%, but that little percent applied to 8 billion, it's significant when you have that many people. 9 billion by 2037, 10 billion by 2057. Given all the crazy things that are happening, right? Diseases, all the climate events, is it smart for us to just keep reproducing? And no, it's not. It's not. US population is about 336 million. We are actually shrinking a little bit. We've seen in Chicago, for example, gone from, in the 1980s, from about 3 million, we're down to about 2.5 million. So we are seeing in more educationally advanced societies that the numbers are going down because people are going like, oh, we know too much. And you start to see like, maybe I shouldn't have 4 kids. Maybe I should just have 2 kids or 1 kid or no kids because the world is getting really, really crazy. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Developed countries, meaning, and what this means is a lot of this is the underlying issue with a developed country versus a less developed country is education. Education levels are high in developed countries. Education levels are low in less developed countries. And so knowing that, like even just for example, in many areas of the world that are less developed, women don't even know the risks of having children. They cause death, a high percentage of death, especially in less developed countries where technologies like medicine, food, resources, water, housing, protections, cooling, they don't know all of these factors. One, can lead to death in childbirth, and two, can lead to death of their children. And so they're just populating because they don't have all the information. A lot of governments are keeping this information from people. More developed countries, we have all this information. We've got more information than we need. So that's a big factor, is education and childbirth. They go hand in hand. There's evidence that we've probably exceeded our carrying capacity, but we keep going. So is there evidence? I don't know, evidence too, like having these 100-degree plus days right now is a piece of data, but does it prove anything? It's data that supports that we're probably doing bad things, but we can avoid it. And again, like us, you're gonna stay inside. I might go for a short walk today. I usually walk a lot longer, but I know it's not healthy for me to get my body heated up so much. And so I will probably take a short walk with my dog, and I don't want her out too long, and I'm gonna ride my bike inside today, so that I can evade what's happening in terms of the heat or the environmental resistance of the day. Where did it all start? This idea of technology. It started as things like this. These situations. When humans evolved differently than other primates, one of the chance mutations was higher cognitive thinking. That was all totally just like random mutations that allowed our brains to have the ability to think about their environment and make changes better than other primates. That was an accident. We are here with all the technology we have by accident. It started here though. So this is probably the most significant factor in our evolution as very technologically advanced humans, was the ability to figure out how to use fire. All humans started out in Africa, and then as they figured out how to use fire, they were like, hey, we can like go to a little bit colder place, we can make a fire and warm ourselves. The other thing about fire that was a huge game changer was how we use fire in relationship to the way we eat. And that's one of the things that they were like, thought fire was like really good for just getting us into colder environments, but the way we can cook food yields different effects. So like tomatoes, for example. Tomatoes, if you have a raw tomato and you have a roasted tomato, one that's been cooked, they have very different nutritional benefits. They're both good, but they can yield different things to you. Like the roasted one makes a higher amount of lycopene, which is really important for a lot of our cellular processes, than the fresh one. But the fresh one has nutrients that aren't cooked or denatured in the process of cooking. So having both of them benefits different yields to your body. And so the same thing is true of like meat. Cooking meat, when we have meat and people ate it raw, you could get parasites. You could get bacteria, well, bacteria are parasite. So you could get like, let's say tapeworms, roundworms, bacterial infections from eating uncooked meat. When you cook it, you don't get those infections. You can denature all of those things, those parasites, and make us healthier. And so then being able to figure out, like, we could take animals and we can cook them and we can be healthier, and we could get these protein and fat sources that are really compact as opposed to just foraging and eating plants, made us also able to like hunt more, build more. We had more energy to do things. And so that cooking thing on fire is also extremely significant. I just read a book that said it was probably being able to figure out how to cook food is probably the most significant technology that we have benefited from and got us here today. Tools. We used to be little scavengers, like lion would kill something and then we'd wait for the lion to eat and then we'd go and we'd take what was left over from the lion. But when our ancient ancestors figured out they could kill the lion themselves and eat the lion, or they could kill their own food, things like this, spears and rocks, allowed us to get, again, those higher yield energy sources from animals as opposed to just foraging. The other thing that was significant was also just being able to take rocks and write on the wall. I'm going out to get some food, I'll be back after sundown, right? So could you go and get some plants to go with the antelope that I'm going to try and catch? Or I'm going to go here, etc. I'm going to be gone for 3 days. Here's food for you, blah, blah, blah. And then it's turned into this. And some of it is good, like solar and wind. We're seeing good advances there. We're hopefully turning away from non-renewable energy sources and moving more toward those because we really need to. But then and even here, we see the car industry a lot changing very quickly to using electric rather than gas. Gas is a non-renewable source, it's a fossil fuel. Electric comes from non-renewable sources, but it also can come from renewable sources. So we have a lot more options with the way we drive as well. The amount of people we can fit in small areas. New York City, it's a mega city, huge. We have, 80s, 100 some mega cities around the world. And the way we eat. This is what we call a factory farm. A lot of the chicken, if you're not eating organic chicken or you're not eating free range, and that's true for any animals you're eating, you are eating animals that are raised like this in a literal factory, packed together, pumped full of, chickens, they don't do that. Oh no, chickens, they do that. They don't use antibiotics. Many animals they use antibiotics on because they'll peck at each other or they'll kick each other and they'll get sick, so they feed them antibiotics, which has led to issues with antibiotic-resistant bacteria in our world, very dangerous for us, but also pump them full of hormones as well so that you can grow a chicken to adult size in 30 days as opposed to 90 days. Hormones and antibiotics that we consume have changed how quickly we undergo puberty, have messed up our endocrine systems. Our endocrine system is a messenger system that tells all of our other systems. One system says do this, and then this system says do that, and organs communicate, tissues, and it's all getting messed up by what's been getting packed here. And then medicine. We have a lot of advances in medicine. I know many of you are going to pharmacology, and there's all kinds of problems to be solved, right? Diseases to be solved, medicines to create. So we have a lot of different technologies, good and bad. And last one, just to mention vaccines, right? Look at how quickly with the COVID-19 virus that they started to come out with vaccines. They sped that up so that we could have them available and save a lot of lives. A lot of this I've already talked about. That just in general, like we call that when we're talking about factory farms, the domestication of our food sources, is that we can grow them in like housing, as opposed to just letting them be out in the world the way they are. Vaccines when you're a child. Vaccines eradicated a lot of disease worldwide, but because of now, there's just like this insane misinformation campaigns. There are diseases that we haven't seen in a long time that are total killers. Like we're seeing polio pop up around the world here and there. It's very, very dangerous. Tuberculosis, very dangerous. And it's all because people are putting out information and total misinformation saying that vaccines are unsafe and vaccines cause autism, which they do not. And all of this different, just like spewing out misinformation for sometimes no good reason, sometimes for financial benefit of very few, and sometimes just out of being scared. Like people who have kids who are autistic, they want an answer. We don't have those answers yet. Recently, they're starting to look at connections between Tylenol during pregnancy being linked to autism. But there's nothing settled on that. They're looking at a link. There are many huge, wide-scale studies that say that autism is not caused by childhood vaccines. We have proof for that. There was one study done by a doctor, Dr. Wakefield. He falsified data on 12 kids, 12 people. Can you get a firm stance on a scientific conclusion based on an N or population number of 12? No, it's chancy, right? Because 8 of those 12 showed links that he actually falsified between vaccines and autism. So he falsified the data and he based it on a group of 12 kids, of which 8 showed autism and a false connection with vaccines. And people who are passionate that vaccines cause autism glom onto that research study. That research study has been falsified by science, by thousands of studies, studies with thousands of people that show this is not true. And also that doctor lost his medical license. So if you were like, oh, I didn't know all that, you could dig around. Like when you hear these like big things that you know there's controversy, your job and the benefit of us living in a country that is developed is that you have access to information and you can for yourself find data to support or not support what people are saying. But we're just so like tied into reading little bits of things on our phone, and then we get emotional about stuff and other people get us emotional about stuff, and it's like, a lot of times I look at the world and I'm like, oh my gosh, people are so lazy. And you don't even know, a lot of times we don't know that we're lazy, but people who get really passionate about things, I'm sure you've had discussions with people who say this and they're like really passionate, and you're like, there's like this, it says no. And they still are like, that's not true, that's misinformation. And you're like, no, you're the misinformation. And it's just an insane time. So as people going into science, it's really important to look at data that supports what a conclusion is and say, is it supported or not? Demography. So one of the things that we can do is there's this field of statistical analysis where we study demography. Demography, it looks at how a population responds to living things around them and non-living things around them. So we can use math. I love math. Great, works for us all the time. We can use math to support what's going on in the relationships, the ecological relationships around us. So at first we thought, well, we'll use this to study human populations. How is the weather affecting human populations? How is other organisms affecting, how are other organisms affecting human populations? But then people started going, ecologists were like, well, we can use demography to also study a population in this area and the effects of all the other living things and non-living things around them. And so now this has grown, demographics is a whole field where ecologists are studying relationships within ecology. All right, so back to that idea of we've got 8 billion people on the planet and it's growing. There's what we call, there's like 2 different terms for the same thing. Total fertility rate, TFR, or replacement level fertility. The idea is that if you have a mating pair, population would stabilize if that mating pair only replaced themselves. You're a mating pair, you have 2 kids, because you're 2 people. But the average, and here's the other thing, is like, we call it the TFR is 2.1, not all kids survive to full maturity as humans. So we say you could have 2.1 children, but you don't have, how do you have 0.1 survive to maturity? So it's really like, just think about it as replacing both individuals in a mating pair. The current TFR is 2.47. So people are having more kids than just replacing mating pairs. The baby boom, you know that term you've heard, baby boomers, the boomers? In 1965, people were having 5 kids to a mating pair. And now we've like learned a lot about like, 5 kids is a lot for making our population grow. We're looking at it still growing. Even with all we know, but again, there's a lot of undeveloped or less, I should say, excuse me, less developed countries that don't have all the information we have. So the TFR, it's still growing to almost 3 by 2050. So it's just, we're gonna continue going unless, I mean, you know, like China tried to say you can only have 1 kid, and that was a disaster to tell people what they can do reproductively. They're having a lot of issues with not having enough females in their population now, and they have a lot of old people, and because they don't have a lot of females in their population, because everybody wanted males, and that's a whole other class, that their population size is going really far down now, because they mismanaged that whole thing. So what we've seen over time is that, yeah, the TFR has gone down, but still not at 2. We're still above 2. And that's even with compensation of a lot of people are not even having kids. So that means some people's TFR is actually probably like still at 5 or 6 or 7, or like my dean who's on 8. Me, we have 1 child, and we're adopting 1 child. So we're actually like at 0 because our adopted child is kind of like taking over the number of our own child. So there's other ways of doing things, right? There's a lot of kids who need homes, but just pop them out. All right, so a little bit about the world region population growth, just to give you an idea. The world natural increase of 1.2, our fertility rates, you can see the world is at 2.5, developing countries 2.6, Africa 4.7, Caribbean is at 2.2, Asia 2.6, but not including China, everything but China. China itself's gone down. It's below that too. Developed countries in general are like slowing down because we know more. Europe slowing down, North America starting to slow down finally. So we look at populations in different areas of the world and we put them in age structure charts. So for example, if you have a population that has a lot of young people, so like Africa, for example, there's a lot of kids being born. We call them pre-reproductive. When they get into reproductive years, you don't have as many, and then you have less older people. But what you have to remember is that when you have a big base here, it will continue to get bigger because as they get to reproductive age, they're going to do what their parents did and have kids. So a lot of times when we're looking at these expanding, what happens is these pyramids get wider and wider at their base. Stable populations have about the same amount of kids as reproductive age people, as older aged people. Shrinking, your reproductive people are like, let's have less. So less kids are being brought in. You have a lot more old people. Here's some actual populations. You can see Europe shrinking. North America, it's just starting to shrink at the base. And here, Africa, a lot of African nations are bigger, so these continue to go outward. And if we look at specific countries in these areas, you can see some of these European nations have negative growth. Zero growth, you've got that stability. There's about the same in every group. Slower growth, slowing down, and then again, those rapid growth areas. This just gives you another idea of world regional growth rates. Asia, which includes China and India, both of them having over 1 billion. China and India have each over 1 billion people. So they have a big impact, and then you can see like Oceania, meaning some of the Asian countries and islands, and all of these are getting smaller, but Africa is starting to get bigger. US population, we just keep growing. This should start, like as we said, should start leveling off. Or I should say, it is starting to level off. But look at that. See the J-shaped curve? And the instigator of this J-shaped curve in the United States is that baby boom. So what's our carrying capacity? Who knows? Okay. All right, perfect timing.